very first shot on a stage is the most important shot out of anyone, right? That first shot tells you a lot of information. Number one, it tells you, what's up guys? Welcome to Whiteboard Wednesday. As you know, I'm a huge fan of teaching off Whiteboard, and with it being 2024, I've upgraded to this huge electronic whiteboard to hopefully allow me to elevate my content as well as education game as a somewhat retired professional instructor in the long range / precision shooting game. Anyways, I'm gonna call this feedback from Phil. Essentially a shooter, William here, sent me his footage with some Triggercam overlay for me to critique. Huge shout out to William for, number one, trusting me to give you some type of feedback, as well as allowing me to share this on my platform for, obviously the world to see. But hopefully as shooters, we can learn and grow from William's video here, right? And then I'll also do some of my own videos as well, based off any kind of stage breakdowns or whatever the case might be. So the way that I'm gonna do this is I'm gonna play the video so that you can see it without any interruptions. Very first thing that I will talk about is obviously the information that's on the video. The very first top that I think is relevant is the cartridge that he's shooting, the bullet that he's shooting, as well as the velocity, right? This is gonna be super important as we talk about, time of flight, we talk about recoil, what I expect for recoil management for that specific cartridge, as well as obviously what's most important is the distance to the target. So let's go ahead and play the video. Okay, so if you guys are looking at this, this is on the Premiere Pro platform. That's what I'm streaming it off of, and I'm just gonna go full frame here. And the reason why I'm doing this on the Premiere Pro is because I can move it frame by frame, which is super nice, and I do this with all my videos when I'm overlaying my Triggercam, and I'm actually dissecting my own footage. So this is on a 24 frame per second timeline, so every frame that I move, 24 frames covers 1 second real time. So let's go ahead and dissect this. So it builds this first position here, right? From a competitor standpoint, I really like this. I'm gonna go ahead and reset here. He's got his bag already staged, which is nice to see. He has his rifle and bag completely separate. I think this is super important as a competitive shooter because you essentially want to, when utilizing the balance point technique, which is a very, like 99% of the shooters use it now, is you want to rely on the bag to help establish control of the rifle when you're shooting off your belly like this, right? Now, when he grounds his rifle, right, the very first thing that I'm looking for with regard to his position is a nice wide base, and that's what he does. You can see him settling in over here. He's got a nice wide base, right? This is kind of like a what I would call medium standing position. It's not really low, but it's also not his normal standing because he's got his base a little wider than shoulder width apart. But specifically what I like to see is how he's indexed with regard to how he's looking through the optic. This tells me that he's got a pretty good rifle setup and he's not fighting his rifle. And what I mean by that, he's a little bladed, which is normal to see, especially when you're punching that support arm out, but he's not overly bladed to the rifle and to the target. Off the bat, usually I can see when a shooter's rifle is not set up for them properly because of how they're scrunched up on the rifle system, and it doesn't appear that's the case with William here. So let's go ahead and continue to play this. And we all saw this first one, which, let's immediately off the bat talk about recoil management, right? So his recoil management was not that great there, it's super poor. And if I peeled back the layers, and again, moving this frame by frame, right? I do this with all my videos, even for myself, is I'll move this frame by frame until the recoil happens. And what I'm looking as I'm moving frame by frame is I'm looking at how much path or how much rifle this rifle is gonna move under recoil, like right where his butt pad is at. So I'm gonna move it. And I mean, it's got a pretty good amount of movement there. And that amount of movement tells me that he didn't have a good solid rifle to shoulder connection. And that's why his rifle ended up jumping. Maybe he wasn't also putting enough downward pressure with the support hand, right? And that is another topic that we'll talk in itself shortly. But something to keep in mind is, in order to have good recoil management practices, it really starts with how we're establishing our connection to the rifle, okay? He corrects it because he's got good recoil management throughout the rest of the 9 shots. But again, I think what he did, this is just me speculating, is that he just started to apply a little bit more downward pressure with his support hand throughout the rest of the 9 shots. Now, one thing that I will say, especially as a competitive shooter, is that very first shot on a stage is the most important shot out of anyone, right? And what I mean by that is that first shot tells you a lot of information. Number one, it tells you, if your dope is dialed correctly or, if your rifle's tracking. Number two, it tells you what the wind is doing, especially, again, from the time that you maybe last got your wind call check to that, sending that first round. It allows you to see what the wind is doing. And number three, it obviously tells you how your position is with regard to recoil management, right? Or kind of like allows you to test, okay, hey, these are the pressures that I'm putting into it. Okay, this was too much pressure based off of how much recoil management I had, or this was not enough, especially when it comes to different styles of props, right? We're always playing with, at least for me as a competitive shooter, the amount of pressure that I'm putting on let's say like a culvert that's, cemented in versus a 2x4 barricade are completely different, which we'll get into in a whole different topic. But anyways, tells you that first shot tells us a lot of information. So for me, I want to try to make sure that first shot is as perfect as I can make it so that I'm able to identify those three key pieces of information. So let's go ahead and move on. First thing that I notice as well as he is manipulating his bolt is that he's got a little bit he's got too much movement than I would want when manipulating the bolt. One thing to keep in mind is that when we're running a bolt, the biggest thing is making sure that the bolt is the only thing that's moving. So my goal when I'm running my bolt under my bolt manipulation cycle is to keep the reticle on target the whole time. Is that impossible? Yes. But if we kind of keep that mindset, we're minimizing the amount of rifle movement that we have so that when it's time to deliver a follow-up shot, we're not spending, X amount of seconds on the back end trying to correct the lay of our rifle, or especially if we ran the bolt too hard and we forget to check the cant, we're not setting that second shot canted, especially as a right-handed shooter. On the downstroke, a lot of shooters will roll their gun to the right, which now will cause a lot of shots to go off the right, especially when chasing wind, whatever the case might be. So my recommendation to William here is to just work on the bolt cycle. Now, throughout all 5 positions, it seems like he's struggling with his bolt there, so that, could be multiple things. So when it comes to bolt manipulation, really, number 1 is technique. Number 2, the interface between the magazine. So the interface between the magazine, his action, right? And how much his chassis, right, is. So magazine, chassis, and action all have 3 different tolerance stacks. So one thing to keep in mind is even if you have the perfect technique, sometimes what happens is, you're essentially having mechanical issues that does not allow you to feed or cycle the bolt properly, that maybe won't allow you to keep that reticle on target, whatever the case might be. But there's definitely a lot of chassis out there nowadays that have done a great job of allowing you to adjust the mag catch. So that's something that I'd recommend William to play with if he's having issues feeding. Wipe that off there, and let's go ahead and continue to play the video. So what I like here, what I'm seeing here, what I love is he's got really great rifle handling skills, meaning that as soon as that rifle came up, he got into his workspace, he's got positive control of that rifle up there on the grip, which now by bringing that rifle up in a vertical spot like that allows all that weight, it's a 23-pound gun from my understanding, all that weight to sit on his hips. Now it frees up his support hand to be able to manipulate the bag as such, right? There's a trend out there in the competitive shooting with grabbing your scope. I'm not a fan of that. I just think it looks sloppy in my opinion, but I know there's a lot of great shooters that manipulate the rifle efficiently in terms of speed of getting in position. I just don't like to see that personally. That's just, again, personal preference. So I like to see, a shooter is able to, demonstrate basic rifle handling skills as, as a rifleman. So he moves over to the second position, nice and calm, grounds the bag, grounds his rifle. Now the very first thing that I notice is he builds this position, which is good. But what I'm looking at now is his rifle. And he's essentially, as he's indexing, and this is why I like to have the Triggercam on, is I can tell when a shooter is having issues with target acquisition because how much they're scanning in their scope. But as soon as he indexes on target, it tells me that his lower base is pretty squared to the target, and all he's doing is pretty much, looking over his optic and bringing the rifle up to where he can see the target. There's maybe like one position where he kind of struggled a touch, but this tells me that he's got good target acquisition skills, right? And again, we'll pay attention to that bolt manipulation. Again, just a little bit too much extra movement than I would want during that bolt cycle, and good recoil management there, even though he missed, right? Transitions. Right, so he does that with all 3, good wide base, his position, right? So from the outside, looking at it, if I was there and I just watched him, I'd be like, hey man, you're fundamentally sound, which, he's doing a really great job. So this Triggercam allows me to now see what he sees and dissect, okay, hey, this is what I potentially think that you're doing. So let's move to this third position here, closes the bolt, right? And let's talk about his wobble zone. Now, on all the positions, so let's look at how wide. I think that target, if you look, that target is about from here to here. It looks like it's about 0.5 mils wide at 500 yards. So at 500 yards, a good rule of thumb is 0.6 mils is about 2 MOA. So this tells me that it is under 2 MOA. So I think it's about an 8-inch plate. Prentice, if you're watching this, let me know what that target plate is. Anyways, if you guys are unfamiliar with this range, it's the CCC range down in Texas. I'm very familiar with it. I've shot a few comps there. I've actually shot off of these stumps before. So anyways, wrong rabbit hole to go down. Based off of the average wobble zone that I've seen him shoot on all 10 of his shots, he was averaging pretty much 0.4 to 0.6, like utilizing the full length or width of that target and sometimes outside. So one thing that I would recommend to William is to allow him to, or take the time to try to tighten up that wobble zone to maybe like a 0.3, right? So if I've got a 0.5 mil target, for me personally, I'm not gonna shoot until I've got about a 0.3 wobble. that gives me at least another 0.1 left and right for wind, right? And again, maybe a lot, you can tell that it's super windy based off of, you know, how much sound is coming out of the audio. So based off of that, you know, maybe he's getting a little bit of wind wobble, but I would want to try to get that reticle floating about 0.3 mils on the target before shooting. So he hits both of those. Good transition. All right, so again, going back to how much he's like using the full plate. So as that reticle is moving, he went from the very top of the plate to the very bottom of the plate and breaks his shot just to the right and still hits it. Hits both of those. Let me clear this off. All right, same thing. I'm just moving frame by frame here, guys. And it looks like he's just moving. That right there is about, you know, a 0.4 wobble. If I take the center of that wobble zone, it's mainly at the top half of that plate, right? So he breaks it on the left and misses. Looks like he misses just off the left. Even though, again, we're not experiencing recoil, so we're able to see it like, oh, that's a clear miss off the left. But when you're in that moment and you're still recovering from the effects of recoil, especially depending on how fast that bullet's going and, you know, your position, like all you sometimes see is like splash, right? But I assume that went off the left. Again, it's a little bit bolt issues there. And hits on the follow-up shot. Okay, so this is what I would recommend to William based off of I saw here, right? Especially off this first shot. And, or let's go back to the very first shot. So with his bad recoil management shot. So this is kind of a common trend for all 5 positions that he builds, but essentially with the amount of movement that he has in the rifle as it's moving back, and that's what I, again, pointed out, is I would mention to William to establish a better rifle to shoulder connection. And so when he grounds his rifle onto the bag, dip the rifle so that you can essentially start high and your rifle is essentially gonna be pointing at the ground. But then as you connect to the rifle, I want you to ease in by widening out your base, which is what you've been doing. But what you do is you were just putting the rifle, or he was just putting the rifle on the bag and then kind of like building his position around it. But I want you to build your rifle and your body together as you're settling into position. That way you can maintain a good, strong connection so that you're not having that issue with regard to recoil. Because now, if that rifle is, you know, moving so far back, you're gonna have to put a lot more downward pressure to, you know, offset the amount of jump that rifle is gonna have, because it's gonna be traveling back a lot more because your rifle to shoulder connection is non-existent, right? So that is just what I'm assuming that you did to make the like kind of audible of like, okay, let me just apply a little bit more downward pressure with my support hand, which is kind of what I do too, but I always maintain a good rifle to shoulder connection to, you know, be able to minimize the amount of jump that I have with my reticle. So let me go ahead and put a blackboard. So these are 3 things that I'm gonna split the board in half here. And I got this from my platoon sergeant when I was a Chief Scout Sniper. After we got done doing missions, he would debrief us and he's like, all right, I want you to talk about 3 sustains and 3 improvements. So let's talk about 3 sustainments and what I think improvements that you can have here. So sustained is, I don't know why I did checkbox. Good rifle handling skills. That's number one. I think your rifle handling skills was awesome. Basic riflemanship of having good positive control of that rifle. Number two, building solid shooting position. With base and fundamentals. So his fundamentals were pretty sound with, getting a nice wide base. It looks like it's establishing good structure every time that he locked out in, with his legs, right? And number three would be your ability to diagnose on the fly during that of like, okay, hey, this didn't work with my recoil management, because again, your recoil management just was bad on that first shot. The other 9, obviously you cleaned up. So you did something that allowed you to correct for it, right? Again, I can't feel what you feel at that point, but your correction or your body adjustment for recoil was awesome, okay? So 3 things that I think you can improve on. Number 1 is better rifle to shoulder connection. So I want you to try to force yourself to build a bridge, even on positions. Okay, number 2, hold 0.2 to 0.3 wobble for 1 to 2 seconds before taking that shot, right? Because a lot of times, if I would go frame by frame, you would probably spend less than a second on each target, or again, some positions, you would spend less than a second. Once you saw your reticle like at the center or what you perceived as center, you just went for the trigger. So try to hold about 0.2 to 0.3. I call this moving fast, shooting slow. So you should be moving fast in a position and then slowing down once you establish your sight picture so you could break a good clean shot. And then number 3. So again, either that's technique or you were just running into mechanical issues with regard to the magazine, the chassis interface, or the action. So let me know what the case was, but I think cleaning up that bolt manipulation will just help your ability to not have to move the rifle as much after you run the bolt, and you can have a good always sight picture of that target. But okay guys, that pretty much wraps up the video. If you guys enjoyed this video, let me know down in the comments what you think, if you got any kind of value out of it, or some of the things that kind of stuck out to you that you might be doing. Also, if you are new to my page and you're just hanging out, go ahead and check out some of the videos I have, especially if you have issues talking about rifle to shoulder connection. I've got a couple videos about building a bridge that you can go to on this. And if you're looking to get started into long range shooting and you're not sure what to get, I did an awesome Tika vlog series where I grabbed the rifle off the shelf and I ran it through its paces. I think I've got about 8 videos now. And yeah, thanks for being here guys, and we'll see you in the next video. Until then, remember, you have control.